Good morning. Today is Monday, March the 2nd, 2026. This is John Richardson speaking with you from Toronto, Canada. And this morning we are going to have a very interesting and very practical discussion on a very important topic that is necessarily not everybody's favorite topic because it's so complex. And if you're thinking that's U.S. Social Security after renunciation or after handing in the green card, you are absolutely right. And who better to discuss that with me this morning than Dubai based U.S. tax lawyer Virginia La Torre Jeker, who has just finished a series of 3 articles on this very topic. But before we begin today, I understand, Virginia, it's not exactly business as usual in Dubai today. Is that correct?
Yes, John, that's correct. We don't want to get listeners very concerned, but since the retaliatory tactics from Iran, we've been having some loud booms and bangs over our emirate here and throughout the UAE. So I hope everyone will stay strong and stay safe. Yeah, the Ministry of Defense is doing an amazing job. People can find out more details on how many drones were intercepted and missiles intercepted and so forth by just going to the news. But as I say, we just have to carry on.
Wow. I mean, that really is proof positive that, these wars don't exactly stay isolated and spread very quickly. Okay.
Unfortunately, yes.
All right. But still, all of this pales in comparison to the importance of the U.S. tax system, including Social Security, right? The war will end at some point. The U.S. tax system will continue on.
I would say yes, that's true.
All right. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the obvious time, which I suspect was an enormous investment in engaging with these websites, reading this, and trying to figure this out. I'm actually not aware, although I'm sure it's out there somewhere, of anybody who has made that kind of investment in figuring this out. And I think I would begin with, I'd just like to get your agreement or disagreement that if one were to make the claim that, oh, don't worry, if you renounce or hand in your green card, your Social Security benefits will remain the same, that would not always be true. Is that correct?
Oh, it's absolutely not true.
Okay. So, given that you and I in our professional lives are very focused on helping people with expatriation, you would agree that this is an issue that needs to be addressed right up front, right?
Yes, it is. And, unfortunately, John, I don't know of practitioners that have really addressed this with their clients. I think it's something that gets missed, to be honest.
Well, you don't know of them because they don't. It's actually pretty simple. It's a complicated issue. It requires an enormous investment, not only in understanding what the law and regulations are, but understanding the circumstances of the client, vis-a-vis citizenship, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a big deal. And before we get into the substance of entitlement to Social Security, I think, and this is something we've talked about before on podcasts, but there are some things that you cannot remind people of too many times. And that would be that even if you're entitled to Social Security after renunciation or green card abandonment, doesn't mean it's going to be taxed in the same way, correct?
Yes, John, that is absolutely true. And people are often shocked when they see, this 30% withholding tax, for example, taking such a big chunk out of their Social Security benefits every month.
Right. So, all right. So what happens from the U.S. tax perspective is that it becomes like FDAP type of income,
That's
uh,
right.
with with
It's
with
U.S. source income, and
with
I'm sorry.
a statutory rate of 30%, but it's 85% of 35%, coming down
That's
to
right.
about a 25%. tax
effective
off the
rate.
top. Yeah. Okay.
So only 85% of your Social Security benefits will be subject to tax. And if you don't have a treaty that will benefit you with a lower treaty rate, then the withholding rate, which will automatically be taken by the, Social Security Administration and paid over to the IRS, will be at a 30% withholding rate.
So, can I give you a very simple example and just sort of agree or disagree? In a country where the treaty specifically says that the U.S. retains taxing rights over Social Security,
Mm-hmm.
that would mean for that residents of that country, just a straight 25 or 26% off the top reduction in the payment, right? That's it.
Well, I just don't want people to get confused. There's going to be 30% taken off the top, but when they get to a certain amount of their benefits where they hit the 85% being taxed, then I think the withholding stops.
Okay.
Or you don't, I don't know how it happens,
Well,
but
I think what's important.
mathematically, you are right. It's 25% effective rate on the amount of Social Security benefits.
Okay, so definitely. So point number one is that if the U.S. retains taxing rights over it at all, it's going to be taxed differently. That's point number one, correct?
That's right.
Point number two, there are treaties that allocate sole taxing rights to the other country. For example, Canada would be one, right?
Okay.
So there's that. So anyway, I mean, I don't want to overwhelm our topic today, but how this stuff is taxed is a big, big deal that needs to be understood. And you and I have had discussions over the years about people who have been really, really damaged by handing in that green card, for example, right?
Oh, yes, unfortunately.
Okay, so this is a big, big deal. Okay, so let's move on to the main topic of the day then, which is, entitlement to Social Security. You're going to leave the United States, been there for a while, hand in that green card, you're still entitled to Social Security. Going to renounce U.S. citizenship, renounce, you're still entitled to Social Security. So let's start there. How
Okay.
do we think about that issue?
Right. I think the best way to envision it is you are still entitled to your Social Security, but your ability to collect your Social Security when you are no longer, in the US, so you're now a non-US person, you're living in another country, your ability to collect your Social Security abroad, like have it be sent to your foreign bank account, is going to depend on which country you are a citizen of. It will not be determined by which country you are residing in. Many
All right.
people get that confused.
Now that's really, really interesting, and I want to reinforce that. Okay. So the determining factor is citizenship, not residence.
Yes, that's right.
All right. So if we have a British citizen living in, say, Dubai, the issue is not that the person lives in Dubai, it's that the person's a British citizen.
That's right. And under the citizenship, the Social Security categories, you can be a British citizen and still collect Social Security without, worrying about having to return to America to collect, to continue your payments, even though you are living in a country, the United Arab Emirates, that is not on one of the Social Security Administration's country lists.
Now, is
So
that what you mean
residence
by
is
list
not
one?
not important.
Now, what you're describing, the British citizen, would that be an example of list one?
I think it is, John. Let me just go into list one. We have three different Social Security country lists, and each of them, of course, deal with different rules, different citizenships, and so forth. Let me just see.
While you're at it, check Canadian. I think Canadian's on that list.
Yes, hold on. Having very slow internet today. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Hmm. Finally, it's here. Okay, so for country list one, You are correct. Canada is on that one, and the United Kingdom is on that one. So citizens of those countries can receive uninterrupted Social Security payments regardless of where they live, so long as they're a citizen. And I think that this is the most expansive list. In other words, it doesn't necessarily limit the person who can benefit from this list to their own work life, their own, work history. There may be chances for others like survivors or spouses to
Okay.
collect Social Security benefits. They may have more requirements to collect, but if they're on this country list one, I think they are the most protected group.
Okay. Okay.
But they will, like you and I right now, we're just talking about the individual who's
Yes.
worked and he's looking at his own work history and his own credits. We're not looking at the expanded possibility for like a survivor or,
Right.
a dependent. So, uh,
Which is of course a huge, huge issue. Okay.
yes, I know there are further requirements for them.
Right. Now, while you're looking at the list one, is it the case that list one includes most of the countries where, you know, sort of the first world democracies and this sort of thing, the people who are perhaps more likely to be in the United States with green cards, or perhaps more likely to have former U.S. citizens who've renounced and that sort of thing?
I would say yes, because it includes much of Western and Central Europe and a lot of key treaty partners
Right. Okay.
with major economies like Japan, Korea, Brazil. Um, yeah.
So that, I mean, that's a huge part of the industrial world. Okay.
Yes.
Now, so what you're saying, the distinguishing feature, if we were to back up for a minute, so if we were to start off with a general principle that, yeah, everybody's entitled to Social Security, but the general rule, I think, is that once you're outside the United States for 6 months, you have to go back for a month to be able to actually receive it. But list one people are completely exempt from that, right? In other words, they just continue to get it without having to go back to the US for a month, right?
Yes, that's
Okay.
right. I
All
mean,
right.
view it as their Social Security payments, so just portable worldwide. So
Okay.
they can
Good.
move wherever they want and they'll be okay, more or
Uh,
less. And you can't go to North Korea and still get paid, but
okay.
there are a few
All right.
variations.
So that's those people are, that's probably about as good as it gets. Now, I understand from reading your material, the list two includes citizens of countries where you would, in fact, have to go back to the United States after 6 months and spend 30 days there. Have I got that right?
I'm sorry, say that again? I
The
don't think
next,
that.
the next list, the list
Yes.
two.
Mhm.
What's the story with the people who are citizens of list two countries?
Okay, let me go to list 2. These include people that are really applying on based on their own work record,
Okay.
okay? So, they have to be a citizen of a list 2 country and are receiving benefits on their own US earnings record. So,
Okay.
that's the glitch with list 2.
All right. And looking at your blog post, so you don't have to go there. Well, your blog post says the countries on the list here are Albania, Antigua and Barbuda, Argentina, Australia, Bahamas, the Barbados, Belize, Bolivia, Ecuador. I mean, it's a long list. Okay,
It's a
but
very long list, yes, and some of the countries are, like, surprising, you're saying, "Oh, Guatemala, Grenada, Guyana, Honduras, Jamaica," right?
what's really surprising to me is that Australia's on that list.
Yes. People are very surprised Australia is not on list 1.
Yeah, I would
It is
agree.
on list 2.
Yeah.
And people will say, "Oh, no, that's wrong because Australia has a totalization agreement with America." The totalization agreement has nothing to do with whether you can collect your benefits when you are, no longer in America. the totalization agreement deals with things such as, will the credits you earn, for example, in the foreign country's social security system, are they possible to transfer over to the U.S. social security system if you don't have enough credits, for example, the 40 credits required for the U.S. qualification? If you earn credits in one of the totalization countries, can you possibly use those credits? And that is one of the things the totalization agreements deal with. They also deal with whether someone who is living and working abroad and is responsible to pay into the foreign country's social security system, if he can be exempt if he's paying into the U.S. system at the same time, and vice versa. So the totalization agreements really look at different issues than whether the individual can continue to collect social security benefits when he's living overseas and is no longer, a U.S. person.
Could we put it this way? The totalization agreements help determine whether you're entitled to Social Security, and whether you're entitled to Social Security is a different issue from whether it will be paid to you where you're after you've renounced or
I think
handed in the
that's a
green
good way
card.
to look at it, John. Yes.
Okay. All right. So, wow, this is an awful lot more complex than I had ever imagined. But we have a third list as well. Tell me about the third list.
The third list is the Social Security Administration's country list 4.
Oh my God. So it's the third list, but it's list four. Only in
Yes,
America.
well, the
Only
third
in
list of the
America.
totalization agreement countries. So
Okay.
that's
But
list 3, okay?
which really doesn't have that bearing on what we're talking about. But okay,
No,
so now I
no.
see why we're in the list four. So tell me about list four. What's happening there?
So that list, and this gets really confusing, and it took me a long time to sort this out. The list 4 exception is for workers who have made a very substantial contribution to the U.S. Social Security system. And even though they may be citizens of a country where where the U.S. doesn't have, a strong ties, it doesn't have continuing, let's say, administrative correspondence with that country, there might be more difficulty in verifying identity of the person collecting, for example. So with many of the Western countries, we do have this relationship with them where we have, heightened scrutiny and verification. It's there. But in the list 4 countries, we don't really have those verification and heightened security issues addressed comfortably. But they don't want to punish or harm someone who is a citizen of a list 4 country because they have made such substantial contributions into the system, into the social security system. So the worker has already earned the minimum 40 credits required for eligibility on the country list 4, okay? And it also says, I don't want to say incorrectly, but ambiguously and not clear at all on the Social Security website, that you can collect under the country list 4 if you've either lived in the U.S. for at least 10 years or earned at least 40 Social Security credits. Then your payments can continue even if you remain outside the U.S. for more than 6 full calendar months. That's really not the best way to say that. The phrasing suggests that residents alone could qualify a worker if you've been there 10 years, but that's not correct. The list 4 exception applies only once the individual is already entitled to benefits based on U.S. work, which is the 40 credit rule.
U.S. work only. What are your thoughts on with the totalization agreement? Would a totalization agreement help you get the 40 credits, or is it the case that with these countries there's no totalization agreements anyway?
I don't think any of these countries have totalization agreements, but remember, the person needs to be a citizen of the list 4 country. So he or she may have worked in another country that had a
Right.
totalization agreement and may qualify, for example, to use the credits from living and working in that totalization agreement country and say,
Right.
well, look, I do qualify for the 40 US credits, e- even though my country of citizenship didn't have a totalization agreement. I worked in a country that did, and I got XYZ amount of credits and will apply them. Whether you can do that or not is going to depend on the treaty. It's going to depend on, the precise language used in that agreement. So I think the point we're trying to make is the further you get away from being on a list one country, the harder it might become for you to actually collect without having to return to America and stay there for a month.
It's sort of an analogy to Medicare, isn't it? Right? You can only get Medicare if have even if you're in the United States, you have a presence there or something.
I don't know, John. I haven't lived in the US for well over 40 years,
Yeah,
so this is not something I'm dealing with personally or you know, I
right.
haven't dealt with it in my work life either.
Well, this is an amazing thing, and what I find most shocking about this is how difficult it is to understand. What your entitlements are, right? On this.
Absolutely, and if you go to the Social Security websites, they don't make it any easier, and I before I wrote this series of articles, I researched to see has anyone written on this? Is there an article explaining this? And I was dismayed to say that there was not like a comprehensive discussion. There was in passing, it would be mentioned, you should check on this, but there was no guidance really. So that was a big reason I did the legwork and wrote these articles.
Well, I think, Virginia, I think that was a very, very generous thing for you to do. I think that this, for the reasons you've given, I think this is a really, really substantial contribution
Well,
to,
thank you.
I was about to say understanding what's going on, but I think I'd rather put it another way, emphasizing how difficult it is to understand, and you better figure out your own individual circumstances.
Mhm, mhm.
Because people tend to look for a general rule that would apply to them, and this
You
is a
can't do it
situation.
here.
Yeah, that's right. You
You
really
can't
gotta
do it here. My
gotta dig in.
Yes, you do have to dig in, and I think before people, jump ship, giving up their green card or getting rid of their US citizenship, if Social Security is important to them, and it is very important to many people, they better, check, confirm their citizenship, that there's no doubt about which country they have citizenship, and check their work history with the Social Security Administration to make sure they've got the 40 credits. Some people
Uh,
automatically assume they do, and they don't.
well, not only that, but I sense that this is an area where people need to be much more proactive in doing their own research. Because like, I'm gonna be really honest here, okay? I don't think advisors do a good job on this issue at all.
They're not
Yeah,
aware of it for the most
yeah.
part.
And the stakes, as you point out, well, I mean, we've discussed this with individual people over the years. I mean, the stakes for certain people are incredibly high here.
Yes, that's
Uh,
right.
I mean, if your income is, substantially made up of Social Security, I mean, I think you got to be awfully careful here.
You do, and I think, John, while we're on that topic, we can just mention that, again, people need to remember they may be hit with that 30% withholding tax, and this comes as a shock to many people. They're used to when they were holding the green card, if they were retired, for example, and they're collecting their benefits, there's a very favorable, like, the net basis income tax and the different rates we have, depending on your income level. Social Security benefits might not be taxed at all. They might be taxed at a very low rate, but all of that benefit disappears once you are no longer a US, taxpayer, and you're going to be a non-resident alien subject to the 30% withholding regime. It doesn't look at anything like, gee, what what is your net income? It's a 30% hit on the gross amount of your Social Security.
Well, that's right. I mean, perhaps put a touch more simply, you renounce, you hand in the green card, you're shifting your tax status from U.S. person to non-resident alien. And
That's right, but people don't know what that means for Social Security, maybe.
what it means is that your Social Security is going to be taxed by the U.S. or it's going to be taxed by your country of residence, but no more of this. I think you can get up to about 40,000 a year or something without paying taxes on the Social Security. Renunciation or handing in the green card can be a very, very expensive decision, for a lot of
Mhm.
people that go beyond issues of the exit tax. Well, it's interesting. My suspicion is that people who would be subject to the exit tax are probably not as affected by the Social Security thing, right? But, if you're not a covered expatriate, probably you're more dependent on Social Security, right? So this
That's
can
right.
this can become an issue.
That's right.
As I've said a million times, right? It seems like a good moment. The great trial lawyer, Mo Levine, used to end his jury addresses with, "It's not what you take from them, it's what you leave them with." And I think people need to be very, very careful when they renounce when they expatriate to see what they're left with, right? In terms of how they're treated by the U.S. tax system on Social Security or frankly any other sources of U.S. income, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think, John, we've given people the heads up. They need to go to my articles and see, gee, what's going to be in store for me if I don't hold citizenship on one of these list countries. And if I do, how do I make sure that I'm going to qualify for receiving benefits while I live abroad and I'm no longer a US person?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, they need to really dig in. They're going to have to dig in because the
But,
issues become more and more complicated if we're looking at survivors benefits or
well, that's
spousal
right. I
benefits.
mean, that's a separate issue, survivors' benefits and spousal benefits that needs to be understood as well.
That's right.
And that needs to be understood. I think, put this very visually from the perspective of a mixed nationality couple living outside the United States, where the U.S. citizen part of the couple is receiving U.S. Social Security, does the death of the U.S. citizen in the spousal benefits, this sort of stuff, right?
Yes.
So, this is huge. This is absolutely huge.
It's a landmine, and unfortunately, it's overlooked. It's really overlooked. And, if you do your own research, John, you'll see there's no articles on this out there.
Yeah, I'm well aware of that. I'm well aware of that. Well, now there are. There are three. Plus
Okay,
this,
well,
plus
that's good.
plus
I'm
plus
glad I
plus this
contributed.
podcast. Absolutely. No, I think this is a major contribution. And for listeners, please understand that, Virginia researches her blog posts very meticulously, but I'm willing to bet that it took a lot more time to put these blog posts together than most of her other ones. Would I be correct on that?
Yes, John, it did because the whole area is just very muddy.
Well, and this is exactly why I consider Virginia to be the world's favorite tax lawyer. All
Oh,
right.
thanks,
You
John.
know, I mean, this is an act of, I think, of extreme generosity. So thank you for that. But we've been talking about your blog posts, and so how would people find your blog? We don't want to sign off without giving them the roadmap to actually reading this stuff.
Okay, I'm happy to give the roadmap. It's very simple. It's www.us-tax.org, ORG, and I think I have a whole separate category on Social Security. You can look, on the top menu bar, it talks about blog post categories. So they should check out Social Security. But since these are fairly recent, they would be most likely still listed like on the home page on the like right-hand side of the page menu. It lists the more recent blog posts that have been
Right, right.
published.
So, and the blog comes out, I find it in my email every Thursday morning. So it comes out regularly every week. And, it's sort of like Thursdays with Virginia, right? Not Tuesdays with Maury, but Thursdays with Virginia.
Yeah,
Anyway,
maybe. Most
yeah.
of the time you are getting on Thursday. Sometimes we may skip and post earlier depending on the urgency.
Well, if for example there are bombs in Dubai or something, right? That would affect your
Yes, then,
schedule.
but you know what? Bombs away. We've still been posting.
All right, all right. Wars may come and go, but U.S. tax issues are eternal. Yes.
Yes, absolutely, John. That's a good way to put it.
All right. Well, thanks very much. Great
Thanks for
discussion as
having me.
always. And yeah, well, if you have the stomach for it, maybe we can move on to the issue of survivor benefits someday, sometime.
Oh, I don't know, John. I think we need to find someone that's really a Social Security expert before we go there.
Well, okay. All right, Virginia. Thank you very much and hope you stay safe in your part of
Thank
the world.
you. Thank you, John. Take care.